my name is Dan Gomez, and this is Mental Health Super Omnia. That is mental health above all. We are all about understanding and identifying mental health issues and finding a path to help. 53 million US adults are involved in caregiving. That's providing care mostly to adults, parents, siblings, spouses, but that's also a substantial number for children with special needs as well. Now, today we have three guests who represent caregiving from both of those perspectives. First, we have Barry Jacobs, PsyD, clinical psychologist, family therapist, principal for Health Management Associates, national healthcare consulting firm. He's a former magazine journalist. He's the author or co-author of 3 self-help books for family caregivers, including the just published book, the AARP Caregiver Answer Book. Has also written a self-help column for caregivers for AARP.org since 2013. He maintains a psychotherapy practice in Media, Pennsylvania, specializing in supporting individuals with chronic and serious illness and their caregivers. For 7 years, he was the primary caregiver for his stepfather with Alzheimer's disease and his mother with vascular dementia. We also have with us today Julie Mayer, PsyD, clinical psychologist in private practice in Media, Pennsylvania, who has specialized for 3 decades in helping women in caregiving roles, as well as those with troubled marriages and histories of sexual trauma. She's the author of at least 4 books and is a former president of the board of PSCP, the Psychology Network. She has co-hosted the podcast Shrinks on Third on psychology and social justice since 2016. She was a caregiver for her father and her mother-in-law with vascular dementia and her stepfather-in-law with Alzheimer's disease. She's also co-author of the just published book, the AARP Caregiver Answer Book. Now, we also have with us today Meg Morrell. Meg has been in the field for over 15 years and has her master's in clinical social work. Meg focuses on mindfulness, self-compassion, and an empathic person-focused approach to therapy. Meg has experience as caregiving for her medically disabled daughter from birth to 5 years old, as well as her grandmother with pancreatic cancer, who has since passed away. I should tell you, and I've mentioned to each of you before, I also have significant experience in caregiving, both for my mother, who had cancer, who since passed away, as well as my sister, who has an older sister who has a terminal diagnosis. Now, Barry, Julia, we have read your most recent book, and as promised, it is filled with answers to questions that caregivers have. But as I've talked to people, there's really a couple of areas that keep coming up. And one of them that I'd like to focus in on, well, there's 2 that I'd like to focus in on today. One is family relationships, and the second is taking care of yourself. I know that many times people will jump in and help the person needing care in the way they can, in any way they can. But sometimes family offers no help at all. Maybe even just taking a keen interest in the inheritance, which I've already heard a story on. Barry, why don't you start us off and remind us of your lived experience with caregiving as it relates to family relationships?
Well, my first experience was as a teenager. When I was 14, my dad was diagnosed with brain cancer and died a year later. And my mom was his primary caregiver. My father's parents were there all the time, helping, especially because my mom had to go to work. And as a kid, I was, coming home from school and sitting with my dad and feeding him dinner and that had, just the cancer, his death, just had devastating impacts on my family. There was a lot of disagreement between my mother and my grandmother about what care my grandfather should have, what care my father should have. And as a consequence of their disagreements, the day that my dad died, my mother and grandmother then did not speak again for 19 years until the day that Julie and I got married. So that was a really bad schism in our family over disagreements about how the care was provided. And that actually, it was that experience that kind of led me on a path to become a psychologist focusing in this area to help families do a better job with these very difficult challenges for families than my own family did. More recently, in my 50s, I took care of my mother and stepfather, as you mentioned, and there was all kinds of family dynamics, including my mother not wanting to accept much help from either Julie or I, and being very oppositional oftentimes. My brother not wanting to help very much, and it leading to conflict between he and I. Um, it put strain on my marriage with Julie. I mean, fortunately, I think in some ways the caregiving made our marriage stronger in the long run. But there was a lot, there's a lot of demands in caregiving, a lot of emotion in caregiving, and those things have impact on family relationships.
Julia, clearly Barry's story starts with a fairly dramatic, unequal division of labor, where he and you took the primary role, or maybe even the sole roles as caregiver. But I have to ask you, in the end, isn't it almost always that way, where one person is dominant and there's a dramatic, unequal division of labor?
Yes, it's almost always that way. And often because the care receiver wants a particular family member to do the care, or there's only one family member, or there's one who moves in with the care receiver or nearby, and therefore they get the brunt of it. And if it isn't just one person, it does get complicated in other ways because even though you have, more hands doing the work, you can have more disagreements at a very detailed level rather than a more global level. So there are pros and cons, but most frequently it is one primary caregiver. Yeah.
So, Meg, you and I had been discussing Barry and Julia's book, and in particular, you were talking about chapter 3. Did you have a question about chapter 3 that you wanted to ask?
Did. It talks about the importance of socializing and social connections. This section spoke to folks gradually leaning away from socializing with the caregiver because it's too hard to watch others suffer. And even thinking myself, other people are not in my shoes, how could they understand? While caring for my daughter, I felt isolated, alone, and had the experience of others disappearing throughout her care. How did you personally overcome those social barriers?
I think that you're absolutely right. It is so common, and I think it's human nature to pull away from something that's upsetting and hard to watch. And the caregiver can't do that, but other people can. So you kind of learn who your friends are, because not everybody pulls away, hopefully. And you also look around. I mean, this is what we recommend for caregivers. Find your people. If it's adult, caregiving a parent or a spouse, we say, go to AARP and look at their site where all sorts of people are talking about doing care. There's all sorts of Facebook groups. I'm sure you know all this. And so you can find your people. And when you do, boy, does that make a big difference. It feels like, okay, I'm not all alone. Someone gets what I'm going through. As a matter of fact, if you're feeling really frustrated or really sad or really angry, these are people who they totally get it. They're with you. They're feeling it too. So yeah, it might not be the people that you thought were your good friends. I mean, it's very sad. It's hard enough to be a caregiver, certainly of a young child. And then on top of that, to be kind of abandoned, at least to some degree, by people that you thought you could lean on. It's just a lot of uh, grief that has to be dealt with.
Yeah, and I would add, I mean,
Absolutely.
it's not just grief, it's anger. I mean, it's when you feel betrayed by the people who should be there for you, and that's not just friends, it could be family members who aren't there for you.
Yeah.
They are in some ways violating a sense of family, and you get very angry. But I think, as Julie says, you ultimately we have to find the people who are going to be there for us. Sometimes it's surprising who steps up. It's not the people we expect will step up, but they are. But we're pleasantly surprised when they do, and they become really important people to us. Um, the other thing is, I think for caregivers, it's a matter of in some ways lowering expectations, kind of learning that people have limitations of their empathy. People have limitations of their time. And so when someone would ask me, how's your mom doing? How are you doing? The answer they wanted to hear was fine. They didn't want to hear the long spiel about all the details. And so I stopped giving the long spiel because when I started giving the long spiel, they would turn off. I could see it in their faces. Like they would, they would back away. Um, so I learned to say fine and be okay with that, and then turn to other people for the support that I needed.
It's funny, when I think back to my mother giving care to my father. He had years and years ago, probably 30 years ago, he had a brain tumor. They said he was going to live for 6 months, ended up living 10 years. But that the level of care that she had to provide, the amount of effort she had to go through, was extraordinary back in the day. And those of us had moved away, almost all the entire family had moved away, didn't really know everything she was going through. So it's difficult, I think, even when you have friends, and to generically say, hey, is there anything I can do for you? They may not even realize how hard it is. So how is it that you ask for help? Or how is it that you get past that initial reluctance to tell them what's happening?
Well, one thing you do is you ask for very specific help. So if you say to somebody, could you go pick up mom's drugs at the pharmacy? They might be able to do that, or they might agree to do that. And when someone says, what can I do to help? The caregiver usually is like, I'm okay. Or it would be better to say, well, my lawn needs to be mowed, or we need some groceries, or can you pick up this, or can you call and can you stop by and spend an hour with my family member so that I get a little break? So the more specific you are, the more likely you will get someone to step up. And the truth is, when people step up, they actually feel good. We have to remember that. It's hard to ask, but if we do, and someone does step up, then they feel good that they were able to help. Does that mean they're going to be around all the time to do that? No, but maybe they'll do it here and there. And I think when you're a caregiver in desperate straits, like, 10 years in or whatever, you take what you can get, even when it's not the most helpful help, just so that you have more people. And some things, you get a little bit of relief.
Yeah, to just add to that story, I remember a caregiver I worked with years ago who got tired of people saying, "Oh yeah, whatever you need, I'm here for you," right? And then never show up. And so when people say, "Well, whatever I can do to help," she had a box of index cards, and in the box, each index card had a specific task, and she would say, "Take a look at the index cards, pick a task to do," right? And so people would be like, "Huh?" But they would feel obliged then to shuffle through the index cards and pick out when I can do this. And so it became very concrete and specific. Um, I also though want to just also say one thing about what you just said, Julie, about we accept whatever help is offered to us, and I think we do. But I think it's really important to keep in mind that not all help is helpful, and sometimes we wind up, making people feel good, letting them help us when what they're doing is not helpful. We may have to redo what they did. Um, and that it's better when we can specify to people what is helpful help, right? I mean, if you have that index card, which specifies what is actually going to be helpful, then people have their marching orders, and that's better for the caregiver in the long run.
Book talked a lot about more in the self-care section, but about guilt. And I'm wondering if either of you experienced any guilt in asking for help, even when you asked for specific help. And also maybe speak to the guilt that you felt when trying to take care of yourself, kind of bridging the two topics.
I'm the master of guilt here. I'll go first. So, um, yeah, I mean, I felt to answer the second part of what you said first, I felt tremendously guilty that I wasn't doing enough, and especially after we moved my mother and stepfather from Florida to live near us, and so they don't know anybody up here, right? And they're living in an apartment down the road from us, and we are their entire social universe here. I mean, they certainly could talk to people on the phone, etc. But um, I felt that I should be making dinner with them, having dinner with them every night, or multiple nights a week, and it was really onerous. I mean, really was too much. But as hard as it was, I felt very guilty. And it was only after Julie said to me, you're everything's out of whack. Things are out of balance. You're not able to be the father you want to be to our kids. You don't want to be, you're not the husband I would like you to be. You gotta find a better balance here. So I mean, guilt was. I lived with guilt. Still live with guilt years later. I mean, it's just. I think it's kind of a universal emotion for caregivers, and it's not a helpful emotion. Oftentimes, we sort of torment ourselves with guilt, but it's just a matter of accepting our own limitations. So we can't be in 12 places at once. We can't do everything. We can't relieve everybody's suffering. I imagine, Meg, that caring for a child and the relationship, sense of responsibility any parent has for a child is enormous. And for a child to be suffering, for a child to have to undergo medical procedures, the guilt must be intense. And so, I mean, I think, we had in our book, we have ideas for ways of alleviating guilt to some degree, but we don't have any illusions that guilt is going to disappear. It won't.
No, I think you can add in some other things. So I agree, Barry, that guilt it's with us from early in life and we carry it around. And when we're not perfect, we often feel guilty, or when we're not living up to what we expect ourselves to live up to. And part of caregiving is you never do, you try to do your best, but you can never do what you want to do. You can never make it better. It's very painful. So there's guilt that I'm not good enough. And then your first question, Meg, was guilt about asking for help. And so there's tons of guilt about that for caregivers in general because, um, we feel like we should be able to handle this, especially when it's my mother or my daughter, or I should be able to handle all of it. And the fact is, that's just not humanly possible. It's not even possible when there is no disability. You can't do it yourself. So it's this acceptance that we have to get to, that we're just humans and we're not perfect and we have all kinds of feelings and complicated experiences to process. And all we can do is our best. And so I feel like we can alleviate some of the guilt if we try to accept that we're doing our best and it has to be okay. And we have to be able to say to ourselves, you're doing your best and it's got to be good enough. And if you can accept that, then asking for help means, like we were saying before, giving someone else an opportunity to feel good that they're helping you, but also acknowledging that a team makes you feel better. And if someone helps you as the caregiver, you feel really good. I mean, it feels good to have someone give you actual help that you need. So that allows you to keep doing the hard work that you're doing. It sort of fills you up a little bit, and it's very depleting to be a caregiver all by yourself.
Yeah.
Having uh, being a caregiver, it is a lot of work. Uh, some people are blessed either with financial resources or government resources where aids are provided. Aids many times can be provided after a lengthy hospital stay of at least 3 days or something along those lines. But having somebody in your home can also be a little intrusive. Meg, you may have experienced that, and Julia, you may have experienced that. Did you find having anybody in your home intrusive at all, or was it welcome?
Well, in our case, it was my dad had a caregiver, but it wasn't in my home. I was visiting him, and with Barry's mother and stepfather, again, it was in their apartment. Um, Mostly, we thought it was very helpful, but sometimes when you use these agencies, people don't show up. Like Barry and I could not take a day off because sometimes someone wouldn't show up, and then his mother would be alone, and that wasn't going to be good enough. So even with the help, we were always on call. So in that way, it wasn't exactly respite. You don't really get a break unless Barry's mother did build some nice relationships with a couple of these caregivers. And when they were with her, that we could relax a little bit. But generally speaking, it was pretty stressful.
While we were caring for my daughter, my husband and I decided to have a wedding and get married. And on the day of our wedding, the nurse called out for the evening, and we. It was one of the most stressful times of my entire life. So I definitely can relate to always being on call, even on your wedding day.
Wow, that is so awful. That's
Really.
the day they called out. Ugh.
You probably should have invited her to the wedding, that she should have known. Even if she couldn't go because she was taking care of your daughter, she'd be put on notice that that this was a big day.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What about when we were talking, um, Meg, we also talked about family dynamics. And we talked about your family. We also talked about family dynamics as described in the book. I think you had several questions about that as well.
Yes, I did have several questions about that. Um, I know that money complicates things. What if you would be able to tell me about some of the arguments? Have you seen arguments over inheritance spill over into family relationships and care? It sounds like Barry, you can definitely speak to this, given the situation that you experienced with your dad. So if you could speak to that, Barry, a little bit about money situations, but also like the family relationships that were affected while your dad was ill.
So what happened when my dad was ill? My dad was an attorney. He was a litigator, so he was, accustomed to arguing in court. And his first symptom of brain cancer was he lost the power of speech. He became aphasic, and so immediately he was out of work. And we weren't rich people; we were middle class people. And my mother was a homemaker at that point, and my mother was very capable, but she had been out of the workforce for a long time, and so suddenly she had to go back into the workforce and take whatever job she could get, and then took a second job because it needed to compensate for the loss of my dad's income. And that was just the reality. I mean, she needed to support the family at that point. That meant my mother was out of the home for really long hours, which unfortunately irritated my father's parents, who felt that my mother should be there more. But that wasn't the reality, right? That they somehow believed that my father had provided better for the family than he had, and or they felt that we should sacrifice the things that we were accustomed to because now was the time for my mother to be home. So there was a lot of arguing around the importance of money and priority that was placed on earning money. So that was one issue. Another issue was my mother felt that my grandparents were really being very generous with their time and coming and being with my father during the day while my mother was working, my brother and I were at school. But they felt that if they were so concerned about the family, or not just their son, but the whole family, that they should be contributing financially, and they didn't. And so my mother had some feelings about that. So lots of different aspects of this. I also tell you, just in my clinical work, I mean, this comes up all the time. I'm going to give you an example. One of a former client of mine had moved into her mother's house to care for her. She actually moved her whole family into the house to care for her, and did it for years and years. And she was the youngest of six siblings, and the mother decided to leave the house to her because of the sacrifice she was making in becoming a caregiver. And the other five siblings were extremely angry about it. That how and called my client, just just a usurper of their inheritance, and just that she was a gold digger, that she was looking to get the house, and that's the only reason she had moved in to be the mother's caregiver. I mean, really hurtful. Caused all kinds of sibling tensions. The fact is, a mother had the right to make the decision who was going to inherit the house, and just because her other children felt it should be divided six ways doesn't mean that she had to do that. But that's not an uncommon situation, unfortunately.
I think,
Wondering if
oh, please go ahead, Meg.
I'm wondering if there were a lot of really great strategies for a variety of family dynamics in the book when I was reading. I'm wondering if any of those strategies were applied to your family in particular, or if maybe you could give some examples of strategies that you applied with clients from the book.
Yeah, in my family, when I was in my early 40s, my mother died suddenly after a heart surgery. She had a rare side effect that killed her. Unfortunately, she had been my dad's caregiver, and my dad had vascular dementia. So she'd been his caregiver for some years, and he was declining. So we had to deal with sudden grief of my mother's death, and also we had to jump in to take care of my dad. And I have three siblings. Three of us are on the East Coast, one's in California. And my one brother lived about 45 minutes away from my dad, but the rest of us were further away. And we had kids, we had lives, we had work schedules, and my dad, he couldn't really be alone for long. So we needed to communicate really well. My older brother did most of the care, but we had to schedule. I would come every other weekend for the weekend so he could have that time off. My sister would sometimes do that. I have a younger brother in California. We would get him to call my dad when no one else could be with him, so at least he could have someone on the phone. It took a lot of coordinating, and we had a text chain and we had emailing, and every time there was a doctor's outcome, whether it was a blood test or he stopped going to the doctor. But while he was going to the doctor, we would get whatever reports and we would share them all so everyone could be on the same page. Initially, my sister, who's a physician, wanted my dad to have more more care than he wanted. So she wanted him in a facility. He was not going to a facility. She wanted him in her home with 24-hour care. He didn't want that to be in anyone's home. So we had to negotiate it all. It was hard. There was some disagreements. I don't know that everyone appreciated how much my older brother sacrificed to take care of my dad, and he was the one my dad wanted to do the most care. But we got through it. It's really important to remember that everything that happens during caregiving with siblings is remembered. So even after the parent passes away, all you have is each other. So it's so important to try to hold on to those relationships. And they're not perfect, and people act out and they have grief, and that makes it even harder to interact because people do crazy things when they're feeling grief. They get angry, they get suspicious, they fight over money. But we try to help people take a long view that, this is your life, and this is your family. If you can maintain something with them, you should try to.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Meg, in a very general way, um, family dynamics are extremely complicated, as you know. Um, there are different types of dynamics around caring for a parent versus a spouse versus a child. There are different types of relationships. Um, I think the general points are we want people to have some general consensus about what's going on and what the needs of the person who is being cared for are, and to work together to develop a caregiving plan, knowing that that plan is not going to be equal, that everyone's going to do it an equal amount, but we want everyone to contribute in some form or fashion, and that there's some sort of regular forum for ongoing communication. So Julie mentioned the text chain. We, especially with sibling groups that are at odds with one another, we often recommend quarterly meetings, either in person or virtually, with a facilitator to try to hammer out what should be done to say care for a parent. Because there's a lot of negotiating that has to go on, and as you know, people are not blank slates. They're coming to these decisions with a lot of baggage from a lot of history, a lot of baggage, and those things will come up. They come into play, and so we don't want we want if the historic bonds have been strong, we want to draw on those strength of those bonds. But if they've been weak, there's been a lot of conflict in the past. We don't want those conflicts to come into play in undermining the effort of caregiver team members, of family members who work together. So I mean, there's a whole lot of work that therapists do, that therapists can do with families around this. A lot of spousal caregiving, really the toughest caregiving there is. I mean, if you're a well spouse and you're caring for someone, particularly over a long period of time, do you still love that person the same way you used to? Well, probably you don't. Well, then how do you maintain some positive regard for them, rather than just seeing them as a source of chores, but still love them in some way? And if so, what is that love going to be? I mean, these are really tough questions. So, I mean, I mean, we both have spent a lot of our careers, decades working on this. There's no end of things that we learn from every family we see, because it's just endlessly complicated and also fascinating.
It seems to me that when you're talking about family dynamics, you're talking about money, you're talking about inheritances, you're talking about everybody having lives, which I think, Julie, you mentioned everybody had their own families that they had to deal with, their own lives, work, and that they had to do. Things do get very complicated. We know from the statistics that the person who's giving the most care, or that's providing the most care, usually ends up financially out of pocket. They usually spend some of their own money in order for things to move along smoothly.
Yeah, $7,200 a year according to AARP as of a few years ago.
$7,200. So when you think about that, here I am spending my own money, okay, which I'm willing to do because I want to do it. Mom needs it, whatever the case may be. She dies, inheritance comes around, and then all of a sudden everything gets divided equally. Or alternatively, a house gets given to a brother or a sister. I've got to imagine that if there's going to be a major pain point, that must be it. You must have seen examples of just severe blowups right there at am I ever going to get my money back? Why did you get the sewing machine? That's a real story. Why did you get whatever else, what other family possessions, or even the house? You must have seen that in spades.
Oh yeah, it comes up all the time, and families end up with family members not speaking to each other sometimes ever again, at least, and certainly for years. And it could be over something like a sewing machine. It doesn't even have to be a really valuable thing. It's all about the emotional meaning. Um, every little thing, people are very sensitive when they lose a parent, let's say, and it's a bunch of siblings. Everybody wants some way to hold on to that person. And a lot of times it's interpreted materially rather than emotionally. And so, who got mom's favorite ring? That can be something people will never stop fighting over. It's ridiculous stuff, but it really represents grief. It represents that they're grieving and they can't it's hard to let go. And it's a way to hold on. It's a way to try to be mom's favorite finally, or somehow make up for something that they felt they didn't get. And it never does that. It just makes things worse. So hopefully when people are feeling that kind of thing, they talk to somebody about it and get some help.
Yeah, this topic also brings up how important it is for, say, an older adult to be really as clear as they possibly can about how they want things divided.
While they're
The more
alive.
while they're alive. So, and that isn't just about money, and it's not just about having a power of attorney for their finances. It's also power of attorney for their medical decision making if they're unable to speak for themselves. So when people fill out advance directives and specify these things, it saves a lot of fighting among families, because then everyone's taking their marching orders from the person whose possessions are being divvied up, or whose care is being argued. Um, and if there are specific things that a parent wants one child or another to have, then best to label it, or best to actually give it to that child prior to their death. I mean, because in a void of information, it becomes a free for all. People are going to fight, and So we both do a lot of work with older adults. I mean, probably the majority of the people I see in my clinical practice are in their 70s, and it's the perfect time for people to think through how they want to handle these things, and to think through what is going to be the impact of some of the decisions that they're making. And if I mean, I've had conversations with older adults who recently have decided I'm not leaving my house to this daughter or this son. I'm leaving it to my grandson, and talking with her about, well, how, what ramifications will it have for how the daughter remembers you, how she feels later, and is that okay with you? And what will it do to the relationship between that grandson and the woman who is his aunt? But the more direction older adults give, the better it is for other family members in something like this. And so we want to use legal means to codify this as much as possible, but also have people be very clear with their family members as to what their wishes are.
Well, so let's shift the discussion a little bit, because at the end of the day, what ends up happening is that you have to take care of yourself. You typically don't. So let's talk about self-care here a little bit. You obviously had an intense experience, Barry. Did you have any breaking points? And if so, how did you manage them?
I wouldn't say there was one point at which I kind of threw up my hands and said, I can't do this anymore. I was, or screaming in the backyard or anything like that. But I was pretty miserable. And my misery made me very irritable, and I wasn't doing a good job at anything. I wasn't being a good therapist. I wasn't being a good colleague, people at work. I wasn't being a good husband or a good father. And it was clear to me I wasn't doing a good job. And I just realized that this is not sustainable. I can't keep doing this. Different illnesses have different, the technical term is trajectories. But essentially, you're caring for someone with cancer. It may not go on that long if they have a very bad initial diagnosis. It may go on for 6 months or a year, and that's tough. That's a sprint. Caring for someone with dementia, you're typically looking at, people live about another 7 to 8 years after they're diagnosed with dementia. You're looking at a marathon. You're not looking at a sprint. You don't run a sprint the same as you run a marathon. If you're running a marathon, and with my stepfather and mother, we did this for 7 years, we were running a marathon. It required a different approach to self-care, one that was going to be more sustainable. We have to pace ourselves. We're going to have to replenish ourselves. Initially, I wasn't doing a good job of those things. So I had to take a bit of my own medicine and listen to Julie's counsel and step back and find ways of adding in some replenishment rather than just tapping myself out all the time.
Julia, when I think about the whole concept of a marathon, it's an apt analogy. But in talking to people that have gone through, a number of people who've gone through caregiving, who've contributed time and effort for their own family in caregiving, and when I ask them about self-care, two topics come up rather frequently: glasses of wine and scotch. So do you see that frequently in your practice? Do you worry about that from a caregiver perspective? Are there other self-help things we should be doing as opposed to having glasses of wine, or whatever else the case may be?
Absolutely. I hear that all the time, and certainly during COVID, everybody was drinking too much, and then caregivers maybe in particular. But it is not a really good idea in terms of self-care. You don't sleep as well, and you're already probably not sleeping that well because you're stressed if you're a caregiver. And it's just not good for you. There are lots of other things that you can do to hopefully get a similar outcome. I think the reason people drink is because they just cannot calm down on their own. They're stressed, they're wired, they're agitated. The day's been rough, the next day's going to be rough, and there's just no peace of mind. So it's really easy to have a drink or two and feel calm, at least temporarily. So we try to help people find other ways get there. You know, certainly mindfulness, a mindful walk, if you can take a little walk outside and get some nature, um, meditation, even if you don't think meditation is for you, and a lot of people say, I don't do stuff like that. I'll say, well, okay, how about you close your eyes and breathe for 5 minutes and just, okay, guess what you just did? And it really does bring down the temperature if you find ways to calm down. It might take experimenting. Some people play music. Some people get on an exercise bike. Some people do some yoga. I don't know, a puzzle, play on their phone, like anything that feels like a little bit of an escape, even if you don't have a lot of time, fit in some time so that you get to step away mentally so that you get some perspective on what you're doing, or you are very likely to burn out. And alcohol's not really a good way to do that. There are a lot of other ways.
Julia,
Meg,
I liked
go ahead. What were you going to add
Julia,
on
I
that?
liked what you were saying about finding a support group earlier. What were some of the supports that you had, Julia? Who could you talk to for support when you were in the caregiver role?
Well, initially, with taking care of my dad, my siblings and we really did try to support each other, sometimes more successfully than others. And that was a year and a half of care. So my friends didn't abandon me. It wasn't that long, and I was going every other weekend. I didn't see people that much because we had teenage kids. So when I was home, I was with them, and then every other weekend I was away. But um, that's probably, I mean, Barry was a big support to me during that time too. And then when we were taking care of his mother, and his stepfather was in the apartment for less than a year, and he had Alzheimer's. We had to move him for his and everyone else's safety. He was playing with outlets and faucets and stuff because he had been a handy guy. And then it was just his mother in the apartment, and it was a lot of work for Barry. And I also did plenty of things. I took her to the supermarket. I took her to the doctor. I spent time with her. I cooked for her. Um, we didn't get as much support in that situation as we probably needed. And we had each other to talk to, which was really helpful. And our kids, especially our son, really stepped up. He was a teenager and he would go over and stay with my mother-in-law and ask her questions and about her past. And that was really nice. And I think it was a good education for him too. Um, But we started writing, and that actually was very helpful. And one of the things we suggest for people is to journal. And I didn't keep a journal, but Barry did throughout the entire caregiving experience. And it's so helpful to look back on that um, later because you forget because you're in it so much that you don't really process. But journaling gives you a little bit of space to process, so that's helpful. Um, I do have friends, and I know people who are caregivers. In our age group, there are lots of people who are caregiving parents. So at least I could talk to people who were doing similar things, and that was helpful too. Um, I belong to a synagogue, and those people were very supportive at times if I turned to them. And I could have asked more of them. They do things like they go to people's homes and take care of them if needed, or give them rides. Um, So there's lots of things people can do to get a little bit of support. There really is.
So you talked about, Julia, you talked about um, your church, your synagogue, a minister that might be able to help. You have friends that might be able to help, other family members. Your husband is a therapist, so perhaps there was a little bit of that going on. There may have been some other therapist that was in your life that was helping out. What are the differences in roles between the government, church groups, friends, therapists, etc.? What should we be expecting from each of those groups? Why should we go to one versus the other, or do we go to multiple?
So could I jump in, Jill? Because this is,
Please.
particularly when it comes to government, I kind of, it's a policy area. I sort of one of the other hats I wear is a healthcare consultant. Um, I mean, at every level of society, I mean, this is a societal issue, right? Our population is aging, it's aging rapidly. More older adults have more chronic illnesses and more cognitive disorders, and people need help. And that help is primarily coming from family members, and more families are in this challenging circumstance. Um, so at every level of society, we need to be addressing, and we are. I mean, so there are federal programs, state programs, county programs. Um, a lot of times people aren't aware of them, they don't avail themselves of them, or they know of them, but they don't feel comfortable accepting help, which is unfortunately a big problem. Um, there are more and more churches that have senior ministries or other kind of ministries to support people with disabilities. And again, to me, the biggest barrier is, are people willing to reach out for and accept the help? And again, people have feelings of shame about accepting help. They don't want to be stigmatized as a needy person or as a burden. And so they don't avail themselves of the help that's there. A lot of the work that we do on a psychological level with folks is we help them come to grips with whatever it is they're doing. We provide them with support directly, but we're also talking with them about how to derive greater help from the government, how to derive greater help from their families, their churches, and to be willing to do that. That issue of being willing to accept the help is often a struggle for folks. And a lot of it comes down to, most of us would rather give than receive. To being on the receiving end of care, it feels humiliating. Though, the truth is, all of us at some point in our lives will be on the receiving end of care, whether we like it or not. And to the degree that we can do it graciously, we really we help the helpers help us, right? Um, and so, I mean, I think, I think, in answer to your question, there's a lot of different ways society helps, and the individual has to be willing to accept help.
How do you get someone, Barry, in a place where they're combating that shame of asking for help and getting the help that they need? One of the ways that I like to combat shame is self-compassion, but what are some of the ways that you like to help your clients, or maybe even personally you combated that shame in asking for help?
It's not easy, and I mean, I have lots of different ways. So one way is to understand, in a larger context, that the help that you have taken on a mission for yourself if you're a caregiver. And I use the marathon metaphor quite a lot, and I really stretch it to its limits. So I say, you want to get to from start to finish. It's a long race. It's a hard race. A lot of uphills and downhills. Do you want to run a smart race, or do you want to try to be hero and just gut it out? And I say to them, nobody runs past the water station at mile 5, and when people were waving water bottles at you, nobody says, "I'm not thirsty." That would be an insane way to run a marathon, because you'll become dehydrated, and you'll basically disable yourself from completing the race. And is that what you want? And so people kind of like that a little bit. The other thing, and I was, that the idea that when you receive help graciously, you're providing a gift to the person who's helping you. And that, I mean, there's a lot to be said for that. That if we enable people to feel good about being your supporter, we may be helping them grow in a way. And I also think we're setting an example for others of receiving help graciously. I think that, I mean, we were very aware while we were caring for Julie's father and then my mother and stepfather, that our kids' eyes were upon us, and that we were setting examples for them. So we were setting examples for them of what it means to be a family member, of we step up and do what's necessary to be done. But we were also setting an example of, did we accept help along the way? And I'm hoping that those were good lessons for them. More important lessons than anything that we might say to them. That we're just kind of demonstrating the importance of both giving and receiving.
I would add that one way to deal with shame I usually say this to people, is you have to walk through the fire. You have to face down whatever is causing you shame and just go at it. So if it's shameful to ask for help, you make yourself ask for help. And what happens is you do it a few times and you realize I don't need to feel shame about this. This is not about me. It's not about my shame. This is about taking care of my my person, my family member, my loved one. This is about my mission. This isn't about my shame. You get the perspective on it, but the only way you get it really thoroughly, because shame is a full body experience, the way you get it is pushing through it. And it is wonderful because once you push past it, you're done with it. I mean, not 100%, but you don't feel it in that paralyzing way that people do.
I love the concept of honoring your mission, which was in your book. I'm wondering if either Barry or Julia could speak more about what that meant to you in your personal caregiving journey.
Well, I actually I'm getting a little emotional thinking about this, but I can answer it in multiple ways, Beck. But um, the fact that my father died and I didn't feel like even as a 14 or 15-year-old I did enough for him left me with this kind of residue of guilt. And and I was very grateful for my mother for all she did during those years because she really had a hard time. And so when my mother got uh, began becoming frail, physically frail before she became cognitively impaired. Um, I really saw it as very important for me to give back to her in some way, and also to maybe make good as an adult what I couldn't do as a teenager for my dad. And this the other thing. This is going to sound maybe silly or ironic, but uh, I had already written a book on family caregiving, right? I had written a book in 2006, 2010. We moved my mother and stepfather up from Florida. It's like I had to walk the walk, man. I had, it was time. I had talked the talk in the book, I had to walk the walk, and it just was really important to do. And so all of those were part of my mission with giving back and proving myself and maybe even assuaging some guilt along the way. Joel, you want to talk about maybe caring for your dad?
Yeah, I don't think I had guilt. My dad was a workaholic, and I really related to him through my mom until she passed away. And then, I mean, I had a relationship with him, but it wasn't all that close. But then after she passed away, I had this opportunity to know him, just him and I, and spend time alone with him. And it really meant a lot to me. I got to know him better. I felt like he got to know me better. Yes, he was struggling with vascular dementia, but he had been a very bright guy. And then even when he was struggling, he was there a lot of the time. And for the most part, he was there. It got worse, but I had a lot of really good occasions with him. And I think a lot of times when we talk to people about mission, it's this is a very difficult, painful, hard thing to do that you're doing. And you want to come away from it, however long it takes, however hard it is. Um, and you will come away from it changed. You want to come away from it feeling like I did a good thing, I did the right thing, I took loving care of somebody, I did my best, I learned a lot, I am more competent and confident in the medical world now. I am a changed person for the better, even though it was really painful. That's the best outcome from caregiving that we can imagine.
Yeah. And I
Meg,
just mentioned one other metaphor really quickly, and that is when people are caregiving, we talk about forests and trees, right? The trees are what you got to do every day, like and how difficult some of those trees are. And everybody gets kind of wrapped up in the to-do list. But the forest is that overarching mission. What are the values? What is the goal? Why am I making all this effort? Why is it so important that I do this? And when people can maintain in their mind the forest and not get lost in the trees, it really does help them deal with it with each individual challenge, each individual tree that they have to tackle. Um, And the forest is really why we do this. And the thing is, when it's over, it's amazing how you forget the individual things that happened or the individual chores. But the sense of having done, as Julie says, having done something really important, having done the right thing, that remains. And so that's a really good thing.
So I am mindful of time, and I know we're coming to the close. I'd like to give each of you 30 seconds to summarize, speak what's important to you right now. And Meg, just a little bit more than 30 seconds. That honoring the mission obviously resonated with you. So maybe you might be able to talk about that as it relates to your personal situation.
Honoring the mission for me, especially when caring for my medically complex daughter, was being able to support my daughter in a way that went beyond just being a parent, was being able to support her through all the therapies that she needed, being able to support her through all the medical difficulties that she needed. And then at the end of that mission, I have now, um, thankfully, a healthy 10-year-old girl. And so I was really, my mission was to get her to the place where she is today. And at times it felt like it was impossible, but it and at times it was really hard. And a lot of the topics that we talked about today definitely resonated with me, with the shame and the guilt and asking for help and support and everything related to what we were talking about. And I think honoring that mission was getting her to a place where she is a happy, healthy 10-year-old. And that's who she is today. So
That's
thank you
great.
so much.
So glad
Meg,
to hear that.
really.
Yeah, very good. Julia, what about you?
Well, I would say my message for caregivers, along the lines of what you just said, Meg, is to try not to be perfect, try to be good enough, try to ask for support. As hard as it is, it gets easier once you start doing it. Look at the big picture and try to recognize that you're a good person, that you're doing something worthy, and it's really hard. And, if there's a way to pat yourself on the back, do that. It's okay. It's good. You should appreciate yourself, not just other people. You're a really good, hardworking person if you're a caregiver. There's no question.
And I'll just second what Julie said. I mean, we're very kind to other people. We're not always so kind to ourselves. Generally speaking, we're our own worst critics. And that's not always a good thing during caregiving. It doesn't make us perform better. And we have to accept who we are. We have to accept our limits. And we have to really appreciate the good that we're doing, even if it's not perfect. So I mean, I think that's what I hope for everyone, just as Julie said, for they can pat themselves in the back at the end and say, this was hard, but I'm really glad I did it.
Excellent. I did want to say just two things real quick. One, Julia, early on, you mentioned getting help from people, and you said something about, even if it's mowing your lawn. And I can imagine most people would hear that and go, oh, no one's going to mow my lawn. In fact, when my father was in the active phase of dying, right? So he kind of like survived for the 10 years, but there was an active phase of dying. And I had to go back to Kansas, we went back to Kansas at the time. I actually had a coworker, unbeknownst to me, she lived in an apartment. She loved the smell of fresh cut grass. And she offered to mow my lawn. So it's like a ridiculous thing. And you think, oh, no one would ever do that. Yeah. It was a pleasure for her because she got to smell the fresh cut grass. It was just bizarre. Second thing I wanted to say, outstanding book. I would encourage you to take a good look at it, buy it. Bookstore we went to, we bought the last couple copies, which we were happy to do, and we'll likely buy some more. Let me let me say in closing, our sponsor today is Equilibria Psychological and Consultation Services, whose mission is to help individuals achieve their personal potential and long-term growth by compassionately and respectfully helping clients live in balance. Visit equilibriapcs.com, equilibriapcs.com. You can also look for them on Facebook, on Instagram, and on LinkedIn. I also am on Instagram, Daniel J. Gomez 24, and on LinkedIn. For the disclaimer, I personally am not a medical professional and I am not providing medical advice. The opinion of our speakers is solely those of our contributors alone. This podcast is copyrighted and cannot be reproduced without the express written consent of EPCS Management, LLC.